You're the one who's dealing with an ongoing active addict or alcoholic in your orbit. Your world is being impacted by this person's addiction. And if you're waiting on them to do something about it, it's not going to happen. What most people typically get to is they either stay and accept it or they go. There's an in-between. That's where intervention comes in.
Hi, this is Tim Westbrook. Welcome to I Love Being Sober. We talk about life in recovery, mental health, biohacking, alternative therapies, and everything related to living a kick-ass sober life. So let's dig in. Hello and welcome to I Love Being Sober, where we dive deep into the stories that shape our lives and explore the journey of sobriety. I'm your host, Tim Westbrook, and today we're joined by Christopher Doyle, a seasoned interventionist and founder of Why Intervention. Chris has dedicated his life to helping families navigate addiction and guide their loved ones towards recovery. A retired New York City firefighter, Chris served as the head substance abuse counselor and interventionist for the FDNY's Employee Assistance Program. Now, through his personalized coaching and interventions, he's helped hundreds of individuals find sobriety. Chris, it's a pleasure to have you here on the show today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tim. Really happy to be here.
So today, Chris, he focuses on delivering personalized parent coaching, intervention services, offering compassionate and effective support tailored to each family's needs. We're going to talk more about that later. And Chris, I'm really excited to have you here. You and I met at Michael Burnoff's event, CORE. What was it? A couple of years ago, right?
Yeah, I want to say April 2023.
Okay, cool. And then you're in Joe Polish's ELF coaching program as well. So I kind of reconnected you with Joe back then. And yeah, it's awesome. Because I think right then when I first met you, you were just getting started and you had just retired from the fire department. Is that correct?
I was getting started on the new phase of, what I was going to be doing full time. So I was doing interventions. Yeah.
That's right. You were doing it part-time and then you rolled into doing it full-time.
Right. Exactly. Because I retired in June of 2023.
Awesome. Okay. So give me a little bit about your background, your experience, strength and hope. What was it like? What happened and what happened? Why did you end up getting into this type of work?
So I got sober when I was 17 years old as a result of my mother basically saying the right thing at the right moment to get to my first program of recovery. It's not like if she hadn't said what she said, I wouldn't have wound up in a meeting that day, And it took me probably 15 years to realize just how monumental that moment was as far as, again, if my mom didn't say something, I don't go. And that led to 3.5 years of pretty solid sobriety, at which point I relapsed a couple of times and then, had some ups, had some downs, and then eventually got sober again at 23. I became a firefighter at 24 and I got on the job sober and stayed sober for the entirety of my career and still sober today with just celebrated 18 years. Halfway through my career, there was an intuitive message coming from one of the people that worked at the EAP. And it was, a guy that was working there for many years. His name's Drew Kane. And it was, basically, I'm not going to be here forever. Some people are going to have to, step up and, grab the torch here on what we do. And, I just heard it and it was in the back of my head. And I probably had, I was on the job maybe 1 or 2 years at the time. And then I had my first knee injury. And then my knee injuries, I had, a total of 5 surgeries over my career. But in the first 3, 4, 5 years, I had 4. I had 4 surgeries within the first 5 years of being a firefighter, all on my right knee.
Wow.
And so because of that, when the opportunity presented itself where it was, we need to get a new counselor at the counseling unit for the Employee Assistance Program within the FDNY, they, called my number.
Okay. And so why are you so passionate about being an intervention and helping other people right now?
Well, I was never a professional. I was someone who, just like everybody else, just like you, Tim, I'm sure, before you became a professional, before you got into the addiction recovery space, right? we just have our ideas of what it is that we do that helps people, that it is experience, strength, and hope. We do what we can. Do you want it? You want any, like they got to want it. They got to be ready. I thought those very same things that most people do, most of us do. And when I got in front of people in a counseling session, and one of the first times I had a client who the reason he was there was because a boss asked him to be there. He got jammed up at work. And so a boss says, why don't you go down and speak to someone? So he's sitting across from me. And this was, early in my career. And I had probably gotten, 10, 20 people into rehab by then, just in the course of these types of sessions where I'd have one-on-one sessions and a guy needs help, isn't necessarily willing to get help, but we're going to get him over the hump. We're going to get him connected to something. Okay. And this particular individual was so resistant, so full of denial, just so strong-willed against it, and knew the game here, knew that, I'm showing up because my boss asked me to be here, and I'm not required to do anything after this. That he's going to be able to go back to his boss and say, hey, boss, did what you told me. And so because of that, now I do a full assessment, and I'm like, this guy is a full-blown alcoholic, and he's got a wife, he's got 4 kids at home, all under 10, and I just saw the whole picture, the whole scene, and was like, I am not getting through to this particular guy. And the fact that he was sitting across from me, I have him here, and I know if I don't get through to him, this could very well be the last time I see this guy ever. And I have no leverage. I have nothing more that I can do other than just, as we like to say, plant seeds, right? And so when I talk to, again, Drew Kane, and he says, well, sometimes all we can do is plant seeds. Because I was really, bothered by the fact that we couldn't get this guy. And I was like, yeah, Drew, I'm not a farmer. I had him here. I'm more of a firefighter where I got my hands on this guy and let's get him out of the burning building. Yeah. But we didn't have any recourse to do that. And so I didn't like being in that position. And then that's what kind of set me off on this. Well, I got to figure something out. And I thought I was going to have to develop something or create something new. But thankfully, interventions have been in existence for, 5 or 6 decades now and have a pretty high success rate when you know what you're doing.
Yes, exactly. And so once you started going down that path of interventions, like who do you follow, or which method do you use?
I trained with Earl Hightower.
Okay.
Earl,
Cool. Awesome.
So
I love Earl.
Yeah, Earl's great. And I did extensive multiple trainings with Earl, which is kind of unique also just because of how things aligned. And, Earl is in the original Johnson model, and everybody is going to have, much like a counselor is going to say, everybody's going to have their own style. Everybody's going to have their own approach. You're going to develop your own methodology within the framework of what counseling looks like. And it's similar when it comes to intervention. And most people's picture of intervention is the TV version, and they just immediately associate it with tough love or like punitive and consequential and all of those sorts of things. And it's a far more loving, caring approach today that is highly effective, at least in the model that we're practicing. How
many of your interventions end up in the where all the family members and everybody comes together, like the show Intervention? Like, how many of your actual interventions end up getting to that point?
Me personally, because of my background and unique experience and what I got to do with the fire department, probably 10 to 20%.
Okay, so very,
most
very
of
low.
What I'm doing is coaching families on how to shift the dynamic in their home, different things that they can do and say in order to get through to their loved one, to get them to take that first step towards getting help in a similar way that my mother did. More accurately, what I would do with all of these, firefighters when they would come and they were resistant and not really interested in getting help and were there because they're saying it's stress, or they're saying, they have family issues or job issues or whatever it might be. And then as soon as I shift the conversation to alcohol or substance use, we'd start getting to the heart of things. And then typically by the end of that session, they'd be on their way to rehab. So that skill set is what I'm looking to have. Primarily I'm focused on parents having that because that's just where my heart is. I don't, it's hard for me to accept that if you know what to look for, you can identify addiction early. And if you understand what addiction really means, it's this person can't stop on their own. They're not going to seek help. They don't believe they need help. Nobody's going to solve a problem that they don't believe they have. So if you understand that your loved one has an addiction, and now we're going to give them a couple of decades of runway in the hopes that at some point they're just going to like come to their senses. As they continue using substances, they're getting worse. Their brain is deteriorating from the substance use. It's not becoming more likely that they're going to do something about it. It's becoming less. So the earlier we can identify and intervene, the better.
Now, is your approach more dealing with the family and coaching the family on how to have the conversation with the person that's addicted, or are you dealing with the person that's addicted directly, or kind of how would you describe your approach?
Yeah, I work primarily with the family.
Okay.
I'm rarely speaking with the addicted loved one. In fact, some of my best interventions, the ones where I am involved, coaching the family, boots on the ground, present for it in the room. I'm not saying a word to the addicted loved one, right? All I'm doing is coaching the family, and because I'm there for the family, and I'm the representative of the family. I'm advocating for the family in all of this, right? The impact that addiction is having on them.
If you're now, does that mean that most of your work is done via like telephone and virtual, or how much of it is in person versus virtual, or in person?
It's hardly in person. If we get to the point where it's in person, it's solely and only because we're doing an intervention that day, multiple family members and everything. What I typically do is I'm just coaching parents, and over 1, 2, maybe 3 sessions, they're getting to a place where everything that they've tried before hasn't worked, and ideally we're getting their child to the place where we're driving them to a decision point, and we're making it so that this is an obvious choice.
Gotcha. So in your opinion, what's the biggest problem with our current approach to dealing with addiction as a society?
Well, I alluded to it by saying, when you really understand what's going on in the mind of a person who has an addiction. Like, so Tim, I know that you're in recovery for as many years as I'm in recovery, basically, right? And when we were in it, how many mornings did we wake up saying, I'm done, or I'm never going to do this anymore. That's it. I can't live like this. I swear to God, I'm never. But by the way, we're not promising anybody else in the room. It's just us. It's just in the quiet of my own mind, all on my own, I'm saying, I'm not going to do this ever again. I'm done. And then how many mornings did that happen? And then you drank or did drugs again?
All the time.
All the
Constantly.
time. Constantly. The number one answer is countless. I'm never going to do that again.
I feel guilty. I feel shame. I feel terrible about myself. I feel terrible about my decisions. Like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? Constantly.
So it's a fundamental understanding then that if you really get addiction, that you had an addicted brain, and so did I. And that is a question I've asked well over 1,000 people who are in recovery. And the number one answer to that is countless mornings, which means here we are, ready, wanting it, perhaps quote unquote hitting bottom the night before. And we are incapable of taking action on that desire in the moment. We need some external factor to step in to get us the help that there we are, ready and willing to get, if only an opportunity for recovery was presented, and additionally, if there was enough leverage to get you over the hump to actually do it. So once you understand that, it's like our approach is waiting for that person to call the 1-800 number to get help on their own, when that's not what typically happens. If that person gets on the phone, like your admissions department is receiving those phone calls, right? And when they pick up the phone, promise you that in 99 cases out of 100, it's because something is prompting them to make that phone call. It's not because they made that promise at 8:30 in the morning, because there must have been something different that has nothing to do with them for why they actually called that day. And once you understand that from a family perspective, once family members can understand that and identify that, and then we can extrapolate that out to society if you'd like, right? It's like once you really understand that, then you realize our entire approach is really off, because we're waiting for that person to call for help. We're imploring them, raise your hand, ask for help. Just ask for help. That's all you have to do. No one is going to ask for help for a problem that they don't believe they have.
So you recently wrote a book where you discuss your stop dreaming framework and your 4-part connection formula. These are simplified as what to stop doing and what to do instead. Let's talk about this. Can you explain to me what the stop dreaming framework means, or what is that in detail?
Yeah. So the stop dreaming framework. So from the family perspective, what to stop doing is, and I just briefly in categories here to kind of make it easy, but it's going to feel maybe a little overwhelming. But you want to stop denying, rationalizing, enabling, arguing, minimizing, investigating, negotiating, or guessing. And so if you just clean up those areas, you're going to be fine.
Okay. and that's the addict.
Of course. No, that's the family.
That's the family.
What's winding up happening in these in the family circumstances, right? Like when you're working with parents, you're working with significant others, there's almost a parallel degree of denial that's happening for the family as is what's happening for the addicted loved one, right? So everything that all my book and everything that I'm doing is for the families. It's directed at the families. It's how you're being impacted by your loved one and what you're going through, the pain points. Here's what's happening. And so when I say here's what you want to stop doing, so stop dreaming, because you can have a plan. You can actually turn this around, and that's the 4-part connection formula. Maybe we'll get there. But as far as the stop dreaming framework goes, the first part of it is to admit that what your loved one is struggling with is addiction. To really adopt basically the premise of what we've been discussing so far is that if you recognize that your loved one has an addiction, they are highly unlikely to seek help on their own. And that's not just me saying that. I mean, it's my personal experience, sure. It's my professional experience also. But the National Home Survey on Drug Use and Health is a study that's been going on for over 50 years, not a fly-by-night study. The data is there annually for decades. And, in 2022, 94.7% of people who meet the criteria for addiction do not perceive the need for help. 94.7%.
Sounds about right.
If you think that your loved one is like you're banking on them falling in that other 5%-ish window, it's so slim. And again, now societal, like back to the society piece, if you take a look at that statistic, on any given year, 10% of people who struggle with addiction get help for it. So 90% are never crossing through the door marked help anywhere. They are just in their addiction. That's 90%. So when you think about the problem on a whole, the fact that we have 50 years of data, you'd think that maybe we'd start paying attention. These people are not getting the help. The reason only 10% of people get help is not for any and all of the reasons that you hear. Do they contribute? Sure. Does stigma really contribute that much? You can say, okay, fine, but I really didn't care what people thought of me when I was drunk on the bathroom floor in the bar. Like I wasn't stigmatized in any way, right? I really didn't care. And that's not what's preventing me from getting help. What's preventing me from getting help is the belief that I don't need any because I don't have a problem. So once a family can come to terms with that, okay, so we're just not going to deny that this is what's going on anymore. We're going to accept my loved one has an addiction and that all of these other problems and symptoms are connected to the fact that they are addicted. And then once that's kind of foundational, once you have that foundation, the rest of the Stop Dreaming framework can begin to kind of fall into place because you recognize, okay, I'm not going to try and rationalize with someone who doesn't believe they have a problem. I'm not going to try to convince him that he has a problem. I don't need to convince him he has a problem. I need to convince him that I'm convinced he has a problem. It's a huge difference.
Right. Yeah.
And so the rest of the dreaming framework kind of goes through all of the various different changes mindset-wise, and then how you can begin to shift the dynamic is what happens with the 4-part connection formula.
Tell me about the 4-part connection formula.
So if you go through that and you've come to grips with the fact that your loved one is addicted, then that means that they do need help and they're not going to get that help on their own. So primarily you want to find what are the options for help for your loved one. And the way what are your preferred options? You want to research it. You want to come up with your ABC, right? So Camelback recovery, let's say, is on the list. Okay. So we got Camelback recovery. We do the research and Camelback is appropriate for our loved one. Now, what if we can't get him into Camelback? Well, then what's option B? What's a step down from the inpatient rehab setting? What's a step down from option B? So I want to have at least 3 options. And if we're talking about a 16, 17, 18-year-old, all the way up until, their 20s, getting started doing something is better than waiting for them to do nothing. Mm-hmm. So when you start doing this, right, you're not trying to change them forever. You're not trying to make it so that they never drink and do drugs again. What you're attempting to do is to bring them to a decision to do something today at the end of this conversation. So in my background, it was, would you be against going to a meeting today? Would you go to a meeting with me is what my mother asked me. And that was the right thing to say to me at the right moment, because I came in Sunday morning at 11 o'clock in the morning with my head hung low, embarrassed from whatever it was that happened the night before. I mean, I was at a keg party with a friend. I was 17 years old. A keg party. I threw up all over the kids' stairs. I blacked out. I disappeared. I have no idea where I was for about an hour to an hour and a half. I wind up back at this kid's house and I pass out on his couch, and I did all that before midnight. And so the party didn't even really get going. And so that was another embarrassing thing. And as my head begins to fall because I'm passing out, I see the clock, it's 11:55. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And one kid was over here he had two girls under his arm, and he's sitting on the couch and he's pointing and he's laughing at me saying, that kid's an alcoholic. It was, and I was like, if I could just get up and, I'd kick him. There I was, passing out. And
Wasted.
So I fully passed out. And when I came to, I found out about the blackout. It was very embarrassing because they were looking for me to clean up the stairs. And, he was very upset that I threw up all over the place. But I had disappeared. And I was like, what do you mean I disappeared? I just came, I threw up on your stairs. I apologize. I'm sorry that happened. And then I just went into the living room. I passed out. And he was like, no, you were gone. And then that's when I had this evidence of, holy cow, I just blacked out. And because I had seen the time before I passed out, I knew it. I knew it for a fact. I knew they weren't lying to me. It was something like I couldn't even deny in the moment to myself, which we're also, capable of doing very often. But when I walked in the door then, Sunday morning, 11 a.m., my mother doesn't know any of these details. She doesn't have any of this background. She doesn't know what happened. She can just take a look at me. She can see the emotional state that I was in. And so she sees the opportunity to just bypass everything and just said, would you like to go to a meeting with me?
Wow.
And I said,
yeah.
Now, this could be seems so subtle, but again, I was 17 years old, and that led to 3.5 years of no drink, no drugs from 17 to 21. Who knows what could have happened to me from 17 to 21 if I don't start going to meetings with my mother that day.
Right. How did your mom know to bring you to a meeting?
Well, she's sober 50 years.
Okay.
She wasn't. It wasn't 50 at the time. But I mean, this is a lot about what I focus on in the book, is that what my mother knew and what my mother did is not rocket science. But because of her background, she had a leg up. But that's what I'm trying to translate to parents now, that if you read my book, you're going to have just as much information as Debbie Doyle did, and you're going to be able to do the same kind of thing. And so when you get into and what my mother did is what I break down essentially in the 4-part connection formula. That it's 4 pieces there. And my mother knew her son was likely an alcoholic, likely an addict, and was going to need help. And so she was just biding her time, waiting for that moment that she was going to seize and then present the opportunity and get me through the door. And that's exactly what happened.
So that brings me to another question. What was your rock bottom?
I probably have a contrarian take on this than most, because the rock bottom is more of an internal thing that I come to after I'm already separated from the substances. I think everybody's rock bottom is the same when you're dealing with addiction. Eventually you come to terms with the fact, suddenly one day you just go, oh my God, I really do have this problem. I didn't think I had the problem, right? I mean, how many people are sitting in your program right now, Tim, where what you're dealing with is them saying, I don't want to be here. I don't need to be here. This is stupid. These other people, they have a problem. I don't have a problem. I'm ready to go home now.
Of course. Yes. I mean, that was me when I first got sober. It was, I don't need to be here. I mean, I'm not like these people. That's what a lot of people say. And I believe, and just to clarify, I believe everybody has lots of rock bottoms. I got lots of rock bottoms. What was my rock bottom? And I don't even think my rock bottom was my lowest bottom, but
Right.
it was the bottom that got me sober. And so I've got one specific rock bottom that I share when I talk to people.
That rock bottom that you share, would you say that wasn't even your worst night?
No way. It wasn't my worst night.
So that's the thing, is so important as a clarifying statement for family members to hear, because the family, when they're listening to us or they're listening to anybody, or listening to any social media, person or a celebrity that's sharing their story, and they're saying, I couldn't do it anymore, and I hit bottom, I hit rock bottom, and I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, and so I just, I made the phone call and I had enough. And a family member listens and they say, when is that going to happen for my loved one? Mm-hmm. How come that's not happening for my son or my daughter, my husband, my wife, my mom, my dad? Why hasn't that happened for them? And here's what's critical is that that's not likely what did happen. They're sharing their internal experience of what it feels like to have hit rock bottom. It wasn't even their worst night. What happened was likely something outside of them prompted them to make that phone call, or prompted them to go to the rehab, prompted them to go to the meeting or to see the counselor or whatever. But in the retelling of the story, it's, I made the call and I was miserable and I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that's fine. From an individual perspective, the story doesn't have to change. But from the families who are hearing it, please know, if you're a family member, there are significant details that are being left out of that version of the story. And after I said all that, Tim, I don't know, what happened to get you sober this time. Was there anything or anyone within the 24 to 72 hour period before you got sober this time that, had they not done or said what they did, you would not have gotten sober that day?
Well, for sure. I got sober because my wife at the time said, I'm leaving you, and the only way I'll consider taking you back is if you never drink again and you go to rehab. And I said, well, I'm not going to go to rehab. I don't think I'm going to need to go to rehab. And I went to AA. Quite honestly, I went to AA just to get her off of my back. I wasn't really planning on staying sober. I mean, I went to AA and I was like, okay, I'll go to AA for a little bit. I'll do this thing, and then I'll get her off my back, and then I'll go back to living my life the way that I want to live it. And, for me, life just got better. I actually embraced the program. I worked the steps. I believed in a God I believed in a higher power that was greater than me. I came to believe, and, I got a sponsor. I worked the steps. I went to meetings. I took all the suggestions. I did all the things that they recommend. My life got better, and my life continued getting better. And I was just like, you know what? This is what I want to do. And I fully embraced it. I mean, shoot, I went to 1 or 2 meetings a day for like my first 2 years. I did lots of service works. I went to the meeting before the meeting. I went to the meeting after the meeting. I chaired meetings. I shared at meetings. I sponsored guys. I called my sponsor every day for years. I mean, at least a couple of years, at least the first couple of years anyways. And I took suggestions, and that was, so I would say that yes, my wife leaving me after a weekend of shenanigans with a good friend of mine, that was why I'm sober. That's why I got sober, for sure.
That was the catalyst. That's the starting point, and that's what is so important for families to hear. So everything that you shared is critically important for a guy like me to hear, because I'm someone who struggles with addiction, so I want to hear that story from Tim. But from a family perspective, when a family member hears, I hit my rock bottom, they don't know all that background. They don't know, Tim, none of everything that Tim just described would have happened if his wife didn't prompt him to start.
If she didn't put that boundary down, it wouldn't have happened. We ended up getting divorced anyways. Mm-hmm. I remember at one point she came to me and said, you're not even doing this for me. You're doing this for you. I'm like, of course, that's the only way it's going to work. I mean, she wasn't happy that I was putting so much of my energy into AA. And it's like, well, I mean, this is the only way it's going to work. And, So, we ended up getting divorced, and it was, I believe she's a lot happier today. I'm a lot happier today. And there was too much wreckage anyways, but regardless, I have to thank her. She's the reason why I got sober.
And, that's amazing. And so you would not clarify your own story as having been, Tim was intervened on. But if you just look at the broad general sense of the word of someone stepped in, someone did something or said something that had it not happened, Tim doesn't get sober that day. That's the intervention.
It was for sure an intervention. It was definitely an intervention. And this is the thing, like she had leverage, which I believe is pretty important in getting somebody to get sober. It doesn't really matter how somebody gets sober. Like even if they don't want to get sober, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter why they get sober, but eventually, like they can get sober because their significant other is going to leave them. Your parents are going to cut you off. You're going to get fired. You're going to like whatever. There's lots of reasons why someone can get sober. If someone has leverage and they use that leverage, I think it's a good thing. Now, the person getting sober has to eventually get to a place where they're getting sober for themselves. And that's the key, because without them wanting to get sober for themselves, they're not going to it's not going to work. It's not going to stick, but it doesn't matter how they get sober originally.
Yeah. The way that I explain that is there's a difference between getting sober and staying sober.
Yes.
No one in the history of sobriety has ever stayed sober without first getting sober. And so the point that I like to make for families is they can be the catalyst to help them get sober so that they can then run with the ball to stay sober. Whether they stay sober or not is largely outside of the family's influence. But
correct.
Just because, there's a possibility that you might not stay sober, that is not you don't really have great grounds to say, so I'm not even going to make an effort to help them get sober.
Yeah. I mean, they're never going to stay sober if they don't first get sober.
That's it. And if you understand addiction, 94.7% of them are not going to get sober.
Yeah, you just got to help them get sober. Like that's as a family member, as a loved one, your responsibility is to help them get sober in whatever way. Just don't enable them. I mean, I see people enable like crazy, and you're just not helping.
And as an aside, a lot of the people who do get sober and get sober, by way of any of the things that you mentioned previously, whatever the leverage was, oftentimes they're only sharing the internal version of their story. And the leverager, whoever that is, right, in the circumstance, it's not like they did it with any kind of preparation. It's not like they did it with a plan. It's not like they did it with some kind of, guidance. Your wife just did it because in that moment, who really hit bottom? She did.
Right. Good point. I don't think I never thought about that. It was her bottom.
Right.
She was fed up. Like she had enough.
Yeah. So we're waiting for the wrong person to hit bottom.
Right.
What it really comes down to as a family member, have you had enough? Because if you've had enough with a little bit of guidance and planning, it's not really that hard to get us sober. That's the other contrarian thing. But then once you have a plan, it's just, the family has to kind of get out of the mindset of a lot of the myths and misconceptions that they have been told, that they have to want it, they have to be ready, they have to hit bottom. Ultimately, there's nothing you can do to help an addict because the addict has to want it themselves, and the decision to stop drinking is up to them. So mind your own business. You focus on your choices, let them focus on their choices, and you should go do this for yourself. All of that does not help your situation. Right. You're the one who's dealing with an ongoing active addict or alcoholic in your orbit. Your world is being impacted by this person's addiction. And if you're waiting on them to do something about it, it's not going to happen, which leaves you with what most people typically get to is they either stay and accept it or they go. There's an in-between. Mm-hmm. That's where intervention comes in.
That's it. Addiction is often called a family disease. How can families play a more active role in the recovery process?
So if I would just bring it to the 4-part connection formula, I think we have it pretty well covered as far as, what is your role? The active role is if you choose to accept it. You don't have to, right? Lots of people are going to make the decision or choice where they're going to say, I don't want to do this anymore. And that's fine also in some circumstances. But with parents, it's unlikely. With parents, there's the obligation that comes from I'm mom, I'm dad, and I'm going to do anything I can to help my kid. And so what needs to happen? You maintain singular focus that your child needs help what's the help going to be, research the help, have it lined up, and know that your child is going to need to be connected to that help. Our friend Joe Polish likes to say the opposite of addiction is connection, right? Mm-hmm. From the interventionist standpoint, just know that your addicted loved one is not going to make that connection on their own. So the final piece of the 4-part connection formula is make the connection. Bring them to the place. You are not enabling them by researching treatment options. There's lots of other ways that families enable. You are not in the enabler category by helping them get through the door, whatever that is. In fact, the only thing that you should be doing, anything as far as your efforts are concerned, is anything that's going to support the possibility for recovery. And what you want to shut down, part 2 of the 4-part connection formula, shift the dynamic. You begin to shift the dynamic between you and your loved one in various different ways that I cover at length in the book. And it's primarily focused on like teens and, or young adults who are living at home and still dependent, and things that you can do to just kind of shift the environment and what you do and say. That essentially, though, you're looking to make it uncomfortable, difficult for the addiction to continue. Right? How do I create an environment that's more supportive of recovery and is not so good for addiction? How do we make it hard? How do we make it obvious that this is a problem? How do you set them up in these mostly inconsequential ways, but ways that can be, emphasized, highlighted, almost embarrassing, if you will, that you schedule them for an appointment at 8 a.m. on Saturday morning and then you let them oversleep through it. And now you start to build a track record of various different things that are being impacted, not because your kid is a screw up, not because your kid is irresponsible, not because your kid is lazy, or not because they're a procrastinator. You start to link everything to, it's because of his addiction. Because again, we're operating from that standpoint that addiction is going on, that you've admitted that there is an addiction here. And so you don't want to make it about them. You don't want to make anything about them. You want to separate them from their addiction, put the addiction in the blame position at all times. Say, I know that you would have liked to have shown up. I know that you would have liked to have done that thing I asked you to do. Or I know that you would, but in your mind, I know that this is all because of your addiction. And at some point, you might schedule a conversation. And this is part of, an intervention process where you get a little bit more formal, but where you're going to have that conversation where you're going to be able to point to a lot of evidence-based, examples that are directly connected to their substance use. So that, again, you're going to convince them. So I think all of these problems are actually connected to your addiction. Mm. And we're willing to do whatever we can to help you with the addiction. Now, when you think about shifting the dynamic, we're not going to be doing a lot of the things that we were doing prior when we didn't know what we know now.
Gotcha. In your experience, what's the most challenging part of an intervention, and how do you guide families through that challenge?
The most challenging part of an intervention is that you're going to be dealing with resistance. You're going to hear them say no. You're going to feel like you're doing the wrong thing when you're not. You feel like, oh, this is wrong, or that we shouldn't be doing this, or we're going behind their back, or is this going to damage our relationship? You have all of this self-doubt that is keeping you from doing what is actually the very best thing that you can possibly do. Because otherwise, the addiction just goes on, it just continues uninterrupted. And as that happens, it just continues to get worse and worse. And so the challenge is really just kind of getting over all of the kind of emotional tugs in the various different directions that all family members can find themselves in. And that's where getting your own support, getting your own recovery program, going into your own even clinical programs to deal with the challenges of having these types of conversations. It's necessary when you come to terms with it.
Right. What do you think is the most common misconception people have about interventions?
That they don't work. It has a 90% success rate. I mean, I forget who did the study, but National Council on Alcoholism, Drug Dependence, I believe. I think they did the study that showed that a professionally led intervention is successful over 90% of the time. When I trained with Earl, and I know that you know Earl and you like Earl, Earl, I had no idea that Earl was an interventionist. I just knew Earl, you know?
Yeah,
And so when that happened and I said, okay, I need to come up with a solution here. I need to be able to break through that kind of guy's denial. That kind of resistance was so heavy. Like, how am I going to pierce through that? And by the way, the answer that I came up with is what you said earlier. It's leverage. What I didn't have was leverage. The reason why I was able to get so many guys into treatment was because of leverage.
Right.
And families have leverage in abundance. You just got to learn how to use it. So anyway, when I trained with Earl, and there were some other interventionists in the room, there was a guy named Bob Marrier there. There was another guy named John. I asked these guys, this is my first training, how many interventions did you do last year? Earl had over 100, which is insane.
Right.
It's really insane. That's what Earl does, right?
Yeah, right.
Bob had 54,
Uh-huh.
and this guy John had 9. And I knew John from my neighborhood. And John he did 9 interventions, and I knew that he had trained with Earl 7 months prior.
Mm-hmm.
So I said to Earl, and how many did you get into treatment? He said, 104. I talked to Bob, how many people did you get into treatment by? 54. How about you, John? 9.
Okay.
And it was okay. What do you, I never would have imagined that these would have been the answers, right? Interventions, when done well, it's like a recipe. It's how you communicate with an addicted person to get them to do something that they otherwise would not do, that is beneficial for them to do, that is helpful for them to do, that ultimately, if given enough time, just like you, Tim, just now, you thanked your ex-wife for your sobriety.
Right.
That's where this goes. So you think that you're doing the wrong thing, or that it's the hard thing, and emotionally the swings this way or that. It is the right thing, and hopefully, eventually, they're going to end up thanking you for it.
Right. So with all your experience, what's the one piece of advice you would give to someone who's early in recovery or considering getting help?
Someone that's early in recovery is to follow directions. The moment you start thinking to yourself, stop. That's the key direction. You don't want to be in your head taking directions from you any longer. So if you can line yourself up with someone who seems like they know what they're doing, is further ahead than you, and you trust that they can probably show you what they did, take direction from them and just do what they say. And commit to it in a sense of, even if I want to see, I'm going to do this out of spite and see if this, like a science experiment, whether this works or not, follow every direction, do it for 90 days, do it for a year, and then, get back to me. And then, they would always say, like, and if you do that and it doesn't work, well, I mean, we can refund your misery.
Right. It's like as they say, my best thinking got me where I am today. Mm-hmm. So, you've got the same person that's making, I like the way that I went to a Joe Dispenza retreat a couple weekends ago, and he talks about our decisions today are typically based upon all of our past experiences, our past decisions, our feelings from the past. And so and that person that's making the choices got me to where I am today. So why would I expect that person to get me to a different place? Mm-hmm. That, the person that's making the choices, the decisions, taking the actions. So, that's what I did is I took directions, I took suggestions, and the people that are successful, the people that get sober are the ones that take suggestions. They do what other people tell them to do. To your point, if, it's like, hey, just do it for 30 days. Even if you think it's a bad idea, just do it and let's see what happens.
From the family perspective or societal perspective, they're not going to want to do that because when it comes down to,
especially someone that has had some success, people that haven't lost everything yet are a little bit harder to crack sometimes. People that are smart are harder to crack sometimes because they think that they think they know everything. And
and that's most people. Most people that are ending up in rehab are not people who are, like Skid Row addicts and alcoholics. They're people who are successful, that have businesses, that have jobs. Every single guy I got into rehab was gainfully employed. I was working for the fire department. Every single one of them wasn't bottomed out. They still had families, they still had jobs, they still had income, they still had everything, and there they were, alcoholics, addicts, needing help. But from the family perspective, what I wanted to say on that point is just, it's the boundaries and the constraints that keeps your loved one in the seat long enough for that collective bottom that I mentioned to happen. So that when they're sitting there one day, whether it's 17 days in and they were thinking, I don't need to be here, I don't have a problem. Or 33 days, I don't need to be here, I don't have a problem. Or 49 days, I don't need to be here, I don't have a problem. Whatever it is, at some point, because of the boundaries and constraints that are in place, that are active in their life, that they know if I leave here, if I don't do this, if I don't keep going, if I don't follow these directions, whatever, then XYZ thing is likely going to happen. And that's some painful route I don't really want to explore. So I'm just going to keep my butt here, even though I don't think I need to be here. And then all of a sudden, there's a popping sound, and that's their head popping out of their ass.
Nice.
And they suddenly realize, oh my God, I've been an alcoholic or an addict all these years. I really have this problem, and I really need to do this. That's the bottom. It's this internal recognition, epiphany, this realization. I really do have this problem. I really need to do this because I do need help. And then once you get there, that person has an opportunity to stay sober because they want to.
So let's go back to your experience, strength, and hope. Let's talk about your hope. What does your life look like today as a result of being clean and sober?
My life today, I have a wife and 3 beautiful children who are alive and well, and I have 1 child who is in heaven. And the fact that in November of 2023, my wife and I could have our 3rd son, Connor, and have him die during delivery and have that sudden unexpected death happen. And here I am, still sober, didn't drink, didn't use drugs. That was something that within a week of it happening, leading up to the funeral and everything else, I was able to lean on all of the tools of recovery that I have been given, so that not because I was struggling with the idea of, like drinking or using or anything like that. I mean, that was the furthest thing from it. It was just, how do you emotionally get through something like this? And so it's an odd thing to say that as a gift of recovery is the fact that I was able to get through that and not tarnish the purity of the grief that we were feeling by going and getting high or getting drunk or not even having that be a thought in my brain is a real gift.
Right.
So if you take it from there and everything else that you could possibly imagine in my world, things are supremely better today than they were when I was in active addiction. It's like it doesn't even compare. And then the opportunity to be helpful, the opportunity to serve people and to be of service and do good work in the world. And
awesome.
Do what we can to save lives is pretty great.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we're coming up to the end of our time together, Chris, and I really appreciate you. I appreciate you spending time with me. How can people find you? How can they learn more about you, learn more about your book, learn more about your program? Yeah, visit whyintervention.com. whyintervention.com. It's the easiest thing. Make use of the free resources. We have a podcast as well, the Why Intervention podcast, where we go into depth on a lot of the addiction 202 material, stuff that you're not going to be able to Google and find easy. We're talking about different aspects of this that you don't hear every day. And so, just make use of the free resources. And if you need help with anything, we are there. We are approachable. We are reachable. Feel free. Okay, awesome. Well, that wraps it up with Chris Doyle. Chris of Why Intervention, thanks again for your time, and we will see you on the next video.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks so much for listening to I Love Being Sober. I hope you got something valuable from today's episode, and if you're looking for more resources on recovery, mental health, or any of the therapies we talk about, head over to camelbackrecovery.com. You can find more episodes, blog posts, and ways to connect. Until next time, take care of yourself, keep growing, and keep living a kick-ass sober life.